Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Juliet Okonkwo strolled into the glass-paneled reception of Sterling Tech, wearing her confidence like a designer gown. She wasn't just early, she was the center of attention. Her tailored red suit, imported stilettos, and diamond-studded earrings screamed luxury, even though her bank account told another story. She had always believed in appearance over substance. Sitting across from her was another applicant, a young woman in a plain Ankara gown, holding her CV in a worn envelope. Juliet glanced at her and scoffed audibly, leaning toward the receptionist and whispering, "They should have separate waiting rooms for actual professionals and villagers." Her words weren't whispered low enough. The young lady looked up, her expression wounded, but she remained silent. That's how Juliet always operated, establishing dominance through disdain. When it was her turn to be interviewed, Juliet walked in with her head high, flashing a perfect smile at the panel. But pride dripped from her every response. She cut people off, boasted about achievements that weren't entirely hers, and even implied she deserved a managerial role rather than the position she was applying for. What she didn't know was that the quiet villager was the daughter of the company's founder, seated in disguise as a candidate to observe employee behavior before hiring. The next day, Juliet received an automated rejection email. Confused, she dialed Amaka, her childhood friend who worked at Sterling Tech. "Babe, they're clearly intimidated by me," she said, pacing around her apartment. Amaka hesitated before responding. "Juliet, you insulted Ada, the founder's daughter. She was undercover." Silence choked the line. Juliet couldn't believe it. "You mean that thing in Ankara?" she spat, unwilling to hide her contempt even now. Amaka sighed. "And that's your problem, Juliet. You can't keep looking down on people because of how they dress. One day, you'll ruin your life." But Juliet wasn't ready to listen. "Please, Amaka, I don't blame you for thinking like that. Not everyone can escape from poverty like I did." Juliet hung up and tossed her phone on the couch, convincing herself that she was better off without a company that couldn't recognize true value. But inside, something shifted. She had lost an incredible opportunity, not because of a lack of qualification, but because of a deeply rooted arrogance she refused to acknowledge. And it wouldn't be the last time. Over the next few weeks, Juliet's social circle began to thin. Brands that once considered her for modeling gigs now chose more relatable influencers. A top fashion magazine canceled her feature after screenshots of her old tweets mocking market women and broke guys resurfaced online. Even her romantic relationships became transactional, shallow, and short-lived. She tried dating a tech entrepreneur who quickly ended things, telling her he didn't need a trophy. He needed a partner. But rather than reflect, Juliet doubled down. She posted filtered selfies with captions like, "If you don't have money, don't come close. Broke is a disease." Her followers applauded her confidence, unaware of her crumbling world behind the filters. In her own mind, Juliet believed she was simply too elite to mingle with mediocrity. She forgot her roots, the single-room apartment she once shared with her mother, the days she sold sachet water after school. Her reinvention came with a price, the death of humility. As doors continued to shut quietly behind her, Juliet remained oblivious. She still thought life would hand her a golden platter just because she dressed like she already had one. Juliet stood before the mirror in her lavishly decorated bedroom, adjusting her wig while humming to herself. The apartment, filled with rented furniture and second-hand designer items she paraded as brand new, was a world away from her real beginning. Beneath the surface of glittering Instagram posts and high society brunches lay a truth she refused to admit. She was a poor girl from Ajagunal, raised by a widowed mother who scrubbed toilets and mopped office floors to feed her only child. Juliet had grown up ashamed of their poverty, especially when her classmates teased her about her mother's job. The trauma didn't breed humility. It built pride as a defense mechanism. She swore never to be seen as ordinary again. In school, she worked hard, not just for grades but for attention. She lied about her background to make friends with the wealthy kids, often stealing their clothes or exaggerating gifts from imaginary uncles abroad. Over time, the lies became her new truth. She began cutting ties with anyone who reminded her of her past, including neighbors who once shared Gary with her when her mother had nothing left. Even Amaka, her closest friend from childhood, had seen a change that made her worry. Amaka had grown up in the same ghetto, but she carried her roots with pride, using her story as a testimony of grace. She often reminded Juliet that their beginnings were nothing to be ashamed of, that dignity didn't come from wealth, but character. But Juliet laughed it off. Character doesn't pay rent, she'd say smugly. It's not poverty Olympics, my dear. Juliet's mother had tried intervening once when Juliet refused to attend her uncle's burial in the village because the place smelled of struggle. She had shouted in tears, "Don't forget where you came from, Juliet." But her daughter had scoffed, "That place is not my portion anymore. I've outgrown all of you." Those words crushed the woman who had once gone hungry so Juliet could eat. Juliet didn't look back. She sent money home sometimes, but it came with prideful captions like, "Even my poor mother lives better than some of you." Her identity was now built on illusions, one she guarded with venom. Anyone who dared to question her was either blocked, insulted, or ghosted. Juliet wasn't just hiding her history, she was burying it. But the universe has a way of returning unburied things to the surface. Juliet's fake British accent cracked whenever she was angry. Her lies about vacations abroad were often exposed when mutual acquaintances posted tagged photos from local beaches. And more recently, her inability to relate to people in genuine conversations made her come off as shallow. At networking events, she tried to impress men with brand names instead of intellect. She'd often say things like, "I can't date anyone who doesn't drive a Benz. I've suffered too much to settle for less." Her past had made her allergic to poverty, but that allergy had now transformed into poison, infecting every room she walked into. What she didn't know was that her downfall wouldn't come from any enemy. It would come from a test she wouldn't even see coming, and it would break her carefully constructed world like glass under a hammer. It was a hot Saturday afternoon when Juliet stepped out of a ride-hailing car and into the compound of a popular open-air restaurant on the island. She had been invited to a casual hangout by Amaka and reluctantly agreed. She wore a two-piece designer outfit, platform heels, and her newest human hair wig that barely stayed on in the Lagos heat. As she stepped in, she wrinkled her nose at the sight of a young waitress, sweating as she carried plates to a nearby table. "Ugh," Juliet muttered loud enough for the waitress to hear. "Why do they always look so unkempt in places like this?" Amaka, sitting across the table, sighed in embarrassment. "Juliet, don't do that." But her warning fell on deaf ears. Juliet ordered food and mocked every staff member who came near. When her food arrived slightly late, she snapped at the server, "Are you stupid? Or are you just used to serving goats in your village?" The poor girl, humiliated, walked away with tears in her eyes. Juliet continued eating as if nothing happened, licking her fingers and scrolling through her phone like a queen above the world. Amaka had had enough. She leaned forward and said, "You were once like her. Do you remember when your mom used to sell moi at CMS bus stop and you had to hawk after school?" Juliet glared. "Don't remind me of that nonsense. That chapter of my life is closed. I'm not like them anymore." Amaka blinked, stunned. "That's the problem, Juliet. You're not proud of who you were, but you should be. Your story could inspire someone instead of tearing others down." Juliet rolled her eyes. "Biko, save me the sermon. I came here to eat, not hear motivational speeches." But beneath her bravado, something inside her twitched, a distant echo of shame. Still, her pride wouldn't allow her to admit it. Amaka saw the twitch, but knew better than to push further. The entire ride back home was silent. Juliet stared out of the window while the driver, an elderly man with kind eyes, tried to initiate small talk. She silenced him with one word, "Drive." That's how Juliet lived, as if the world existed to serve her, and anyone without money was a burden she was too important to carry. What Juliet didn't know was that fate was weaving its own net. The driver she just insulted happened to be a close friend of a powerful woman who had been observing her behavior for weeks. That woman, Mama Grace, wasn't just a wealthy CEO. She was also a mother who had raised her only son with values of humility, compassion, and discernment. When Charles, her son, mentioned he had met a beautiful woman he was considering for marriage, Mama Grace didn't jump with joy. She had seen Juliet's type before, pretty on the outside, poisonous on the inside. But instead of confronting her son, she planned a test. A very simple, quiet test. If she truly loves you, she told Charles, she will love the things that matter to you. Not just the money. Charles agreed, curious more than convinced. Juliet had no idea that her final exam was already scheduled, and the invigilator would be the very type of person she mocked every day. Days after the restaurant incident, Amaka invited Juliet for a heart-to-heart talk. They met at a small rooftop cafe in Acadia, away from Juliet's usual flashy hangouts. Amaka, wearing a modest gown and simple flats, ordered Zobo, while Juliet frowned at the plastic cup. "No cocktails?" she asked, looking around. "This place looks like a boarding school cafeteria." Amaka didn't laugh. She folded her arms and leaned in. "Juliet, I need to talk to you seriously. This thing you're doing, this attitude, it's going to destroy you. You keep burning bridges, treating people like trash, forgetting that you once needed those same people." Juliet scoffed. "I've evolved. I'm not that broke girl anymore." Amaka sighed. "Evolving doesn't mean losing your humanity. It means growing better, not colder. Do you know how many opportunities you've lost just because of your mouth?" Juliet shrugged. "They were never meant for me then." Amaka shook her head slowly. "No, you just weren't ready for them. Juliet, when will you stop pretending to be who you're not? You live in a rented apartment, wear borrowed labels, and yet you look down on people who work hard and live honestly. Do you think that's strength?" Juliet felt a stab in her chest, but masked it with laughter. "Amaka, you sound jealous. Just say it. You miss the days when we were both nobodies. But some of us have moved on. You're still stuck in humility, and I've upgraded." Amaka stared at her in disbelief. "Wow, that's how you see it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small picture, an old photo of them as children, barefoot, smiling, and sharing puff-puff in the street. "That was us. That's who you really are. The Juliet I knew had kindness in her eyes. Now I don't recognize you anymore." Juliet took the picture, looked at it, and for a moment, her smile faded. But she quickly snapped back. "That Juliet is dead. I buried her." Amaka rose to her feet. "Then may God help the woman you've become." She walked away, leaving Juliet staring at the photo in her trembling hands. For the first time in a long while, Juliet felt something stir, not guilt, but fear. Fear that her life, built on pride, was heading toward a wall she couldn't avoid. Later that night, Charles called her. His voice, gentle and deep, calmed her. "My mom wants to meet you," he said. "She lives a quiet life in the mainland, nothing fancy. I want us to spend the weekend there." Juliet hesitated. "Mainland? You. But okay, for you." She forced a giggle. "Should I bring wine?" Charles chuckled. "She doesn't drink. Just come as you are." "And Juliet," he paused. "Be yourself. She doesn't care about wealth. She only cares about kindness." Juliet rolled her eyes. "Don't worry, baby. I'll charm her." But deep inside, she was already judging the woman she hadn't met. In her mind, the mother of a man like Charles had to be some village woman lucky to have a rich son. She planned to tolerate her for a weekend, not knowing that in just a few hours she would cross a line that would destroy her entire future. Juliet woke up early on Saturday morning, carefully selecting the perfect outfit to meet her fiancé's mother. She picked a fitted designer dress with a plunging neckline, believing it would make a bold first impression. She layered it with expensive jewelry and finished with heels that clacked like authority with every step. In her mind, mothers loved women who were beautiful and classy, and she was both. What she didn't know was that Charles's mother, Mama Grace, was a woman of simple values. A billionaire who had built her empire from ground up, Mama Grace believed in humility over wealth and character over beauty. Her home, nestled in a quiet estate on the mainland, didn't reflect her riches. It reflected her values. No house helps. No flashy gates. Just a compound filled with fruit trees, clean tiled floors, and the warm scent of homemade food. Charles had warned his mother not to mention her status. "I want her to meet your heart, not your name," he said. Mama Grace had smiled. "Then I will test her spirit first." When Juliet and Charles arrived, Mama Grace was sweeping the compound, dressed in a simple gown, her gray hair tied in a scarf, and slippers on her feet. To Juliet it was obvious. This was the maid. She whispered to Charles. "She should wear gloves or something." Charles didn't respond. He was watching closely. Juliet stepped out of the car without greeting the woman and walked inside like she owned the house. "Where's your mom?" she asked. Charles calmly said, "She'll be with us shortly." Meanwhile, Mama Grace continued sweeping, smiling silently. Juliet took out her phone and began recording a selfie video for Instagram. POV: visiting Bay's mom, but their maid is sweeping like she owns the place. She laughed and tagged it with #MainlandChronicles. Charles saw the post later, but kept quiet. He needed to be sure. After brunch, Juliet demanded cold wine and snacks. "Tell the maid to hurry," she said, pointing towards Mama Grace, who was now watering her plants. "She looks too old for this job." Still, Charles said nothing. Mama Grace served them zobo with garden fruits. Juliet frowned. This looks so pedestrian. Later that evening, Mama Grace sat across from Juliet during dinner. "So, my dear," she said softly, "tell me about yourself." Juliet crossed her legs, swirled the wine in her glass, and smiled proudly. "Well, I'm a digital creator, fashion ambassador, and future CEO of my own beauty brand. I believe in luxury and success. Life is too short to be poor." Mama Grace nodded slowly. "And what do you believe about people who are poor?" Juliet chuckled. "That it's mostly their fault. I mean, everyone has the same 24 hours. You can't expect me to respect someone who can't afford basic things." Charles closed his eyes briefly. Juliet's ignorance was beginning to sting. Mama Grace took a sip of her zobo and looked at her son. "You brought a strong one home, Charles." He nodded quietly, his heart growing heavy with doubt. That night, he lay in bed beside Juliet, replaying every arrogant comment she had made. Her beauty had dazzled him, yes. But now, her heart was starting to repulse him, and the test hadn't even begun. The next day started quietly, with birds chirping outside and the sun casting soft rays over the peaceful compound. Juliet, however, was unimpressed. "No air conditioning? And mosquitoes too," she murmured, scratching her leg. Mama Grace was in the kitchen, preparing yam and vegetable sauce for breakfast. Juliet walked in and, seeing her again, frowned. "You again? Aren't you tired of pretending to be busy?" Mama Grace smiled warmly. "Good morning, my dear. Would you like to help me stir the sauce?" Juliet took a step back like she'd been asked to handle acid. "I don't cook. I don't even eat this kind of food. I'm gluten sensitive." She turned and walked away. Mama Grace shook her head. "Hot help my son." Meanwhile, Charles sat outside reading. His mother joined him quietly. "You said she grew up in the ghetto," she said. "Yes, Mama," Charles replied, still reading. "But now, she pretends she was born in Banana Island." Mama Grace laughed softly. "Then perhaps, my son, she is afraid of who she used to be." Charles remained silent, but his silence was a loud echo in his soul. He had wanted Juliet to be real. Instead, he was starting to see she was just beautiful packaging. Later that afternoon, Mama Grace deliberately left some clothes outside on the line and sprinkled water near the hanging sheets. Juliet, bored and scrolling her phone, walked out and stepped on the water-soaked ground. "Ah," she screamed. "My shoes." She turned to Mama Grace. "You old woman. Don't you know better? Are you blind or just stupid?" Mama Grace calmly replied, "I'm sorry, my daughter. I didn't see you coming." That only made Juliet angrier. "Useless woman. If I lose this shoe, you'll pay for it with your life." With that, Juliet raised her hand and slapped Mama Grace across the face. Charles heard the sound from inside and rushed out in horror. Juliet stood with her chest heaving, eyes flaming. She's been irritating me since I got here. And you just let her roam around like a ghost. Mama Grace touched her cheek, still calm. Charles's face turned red, not from anger alone, but heartbreak. Juliet, he said slowly, this woman you just slapped is my mother. The silence that followed was deafening. Juliet froze, her palms still tingling. What? She stammered. Charles stepped forward. She's not a maid. She's Mama Grace, the CEO of Grace Holdings. A woman who feeds thousands and still sweeps her own home. Juliet's lips trembled. But she looks like someone you think doesn't deserve respect, Charles cut in. And now you've shown me who you really are. He turned away and walked into the house. Juliet turned to Mama Grace, tears forming in her eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Mama Grace looked at her with pity. That's the problem, Juliet. You judge people before knowing them. You speak like a queen, but your heart is poor. With that, she walked away, leaving Juliet standing alone, humiliated and shattered. The slap she had given was about to become the one moment that ruined everything she had built with lies. The hours that followed felt like a blur. Juliet sat on the front steps of the house, her pride crumbling with each passing minute. She stared blankly into space, unable to process what had just happened. The same woman she had insulted, bossed around, and physically assaulted was the very person who could have been her future mother-in-law, and a secret billionaire. Her entire world flipped upside down in seconds. She thought about the things she had said, the mocking looks she gave, and the arrogance in her tone. Suddenly, her designer dress felt like shame wrapped in fabric. She didn't even notice the dust on her shoes or the sweat on her face. For the first time in years, Juliet was silent, not out of pride, but out of sheer realization. Her phone vibrated. Social media notifications. But this time, she didn't care. For once, she wasn't interested in uploading the moment. She was living the worst moment of her life, and no filter could fix it. Inside, Charles sat with his mother, who was now icing her cheek gently. Mama, I'm sorry, he said broken. I didn't think I never thought it would go that far. Mama Grace looked at him, her eyes soft but firm. I knew who she was from the beginning. That's why I dressed like this. If she had treated me well when she thought I was nothing, I would have known her heart was good. Charles nodded slowly. I see it now. He clenched his jaw. She's not the woman I want to build my future with. Mama Grace squeezed his hand. You have a good heart, Charles. Don't settle for beauty without substance. The world is full of pretty faces, but rare is the woman with a beautiful soul. Meanwhile, Juliet stood by the door, overhearing everything. Each word pierced her deeper than the slap she had delivered. She wanted to scream, cry, defend herself, but nothing could excuse what she had done. She had failed the test, not just in front of a man, but in front of her own destiny. Later, Juliet tried to apologize again. She knelt before Mama Grace, tears staining her makeup. Please forgive me. I didn't know. I was just being yourself, Mama Grace said calmly. And now the truth has come out. Charles walked past her with his suitcase, avoiding her gaze. Go home, Juliet, he said. This chapter is closed. Juliet felt the words like a blade across her chest. She was being dismissed, not by a man, but by the life she could have had. She got into a ride back to her apartment, numb. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door. Inside, the once dazzling space now felt empty, fake, a monument to pride. She collapsed on the couch and wept bitterly. For the first time in her adult life, Juliet wasn't crying because she was losing something material. She was crying because she finally saw what she had become, and she hated it. Juliet didn't leave her apartment for days. The curtains remained drawn, and her once vibrant Instagram account went silent. Her friends noticed first. The same people who used to call her for brand collaborations, luxury parties, and red carpet appearances began whispering among themselves. Word had already spread that she had assaulted a wealthy woman, and not just any woman, but Mama Grace, the secret billionaire and powerful CEO of Grace Holdings. Though there were no photos or recordings of the slap itself, Mama Grace's influence ensured the truth found its way into the right circles. Event organizers began withdrawing invites. Modeling agencies quietly took down her photos from their websites. She reached out to a few brand partners to ask about upcoming deals, only to be met with cold responses. One said plainly, "We don't want your name associated with our product. You're trending, but for the wrong reasons." Juliet was stunned. How quickly the world turned on her. Her entire career, built on appearances and arrogance, was now crumbling before her eyes, and there was no amount of makeup or designer heels that could cover the shame. Juliet clutched her phone, dialing Charles repeatedly, but he never picked up. She sent voice notes, long messages, even photos of herself crying, but he read them without replying. His silence was louder than any insult. She thought back to the moments when he would listen to her talk for hours, when he would laugh at her jokes, when he would proudly hold her hand in public. Now, he treated her like a stranger. The worst part? She knew she had no one to blame but herself. Her tears weren't just from heartbreak, they were from regret. Her pride had become a weapon that turned on her. She had spent years pretending to be above everyone, only to find herself alone, abandoned, and quickly forgotten. The women she mocked, the men she ignored, and the friends she outgrew now had something she didn't: peace. She realized then that she had never truly known love, only attention. And now even that was gone. In her solitude, Juliet began reflecting on how far she had fallen. She replayed every moment leading up to the slap, the look on Mama Grace's face, Charles's disappointment, and even Amaka's earlier warnings. Her entire life had been one long performance, and now the stage was empty. No applause, no lights, just silence. She remembered something her mother once told her: "If you keep stepping on people to climb, you'll one day fall from a height too high for anyone to catch you." Back then, she had rolled her eyes. Now, those words rang louder than ever. Juliet began to scroll through her old photos, the lavish parties, vacations she never truly enjoyed, clothes she wore only for validation, and all she saw was a frightened girl hiding behind pride. She turned off her phone, crawled into bed, and wept like a child. The mask had fallen, and what remained was a broken woman finally seeing herself for who she truly was. Juliet awoke to hundreds of messages and missed calls, not from loved ones, but from bloggers, online trolls, and strangers hungry for gossip. Her name had somehow gotten leaked into the stories circulating online. Insta-influencer slaps billionaire CEO, mistook her for Maid. Even though her name wasn't officially mentioned, people connected the dots quickly. A popular gossip blog had reposted one of her past videos where she arrogantly captioned, "Don't greet me if your account balance is below 6 digits." That video was now being used against her. The same followers who once praised her confidence were now in her comments calling her a disgrace, a social climber, and a fraud. Memes were made. Videos mocked her voice and mannerisms. "Gluten-free glam queen becomes gluten for punishment," one tweet read. It would have been funny if it weren't her life. Her inbox was filled with brand termination letters. Even the fashion store that used to gift her outfits requested that she return their clothes or face legal consequences. Her influence was now toxic, and no one wanted to be associated with her downfall. In desperation, Juliet called Amaka. Her voice cracked. "Please, I need you." There was a long silence on the line. "Juliet," Amaka finally said, "I warned you. So many times. I begged you to change. But you chose pride over friendship." Juliet sobbed. "I know. I was wrong. I was blind." Amaka sighed. "What you did, it wasn't just a mistake. It was who you are. But maybe now you're ready to become someone better." Juliet clung to those words like a lifeline. "Can I come stay with you for a few days?" she asked. Amaka hesitated. "Only if you're ready to start over. No wigs. No lies. No filters." Juliet paused. "Okay," she whispered. She packed a small bag, this time no designer brands, just a few simple clothes she had hidden behind in shame. As she stepped out of her apartment, she didn't even care about the paparazzi waiting downstairs. She walked past them with her head low. For the first time in years, she had no pride left to protect. All she had was pain, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at redemption. When she arrived at Amaka's house, she was welcomed with a quiet hug and a warm plate of beans and plantain. It felt strange, but comforting. The silence in the room wasn't judgmental. It was healing. Amaka let her sleep in her spare room and promised to help her start small. "You need to find out who Juliet is without all the shine," she said. Juliet nodded, still unsure of how to begin. That night, she looked at herself in the mirror. No makeup, no filters. Just the girl from Ajagunal who had once dreamed of making her mother proud. She remembered her mother's sacrifices, the burnt fingers from cooking over open fire, the nights she cried silently when Juliet mocked her old clothes. Juliet wept again, but this time the tears weren't selfish. They were cleansing. A part of her, the hardened, pretentious part, had died. And maybe, just maybe, something beautiful was beginning to grow from the ruins. 2 weeks later, Juliet received a notice to vacate her apartment. She had defaulted on rent for 3 months, and now with no income and no sponsors, the property managers weren't willing to extend grace. She stood in the living room surrounded by boxes, staring at her reflection in the wall mirror. The once vibrant influencer, who hosted glow-up tutorials and boss babe Q&A sessions, was now packing her life into old travel bags. She pulled out a box of high heels and stared at them. "I used to think these made me powerful," she whispered. "But they were just noise." She dropped the box and sat on the floor. Outside, the compound boys watched with quiet amusement as the landlord's assistants began to move out her things. Her shame was public, and she could no longer hide behind tinted car windows or flashy apartment gates. For the first time, Juliet felt what it was like to be seen, not as a goddess, but as a fallen woman trying to piece herself back together. She moved into Amaka's place permanently. It wasn't fancy, just a 2-bedroom flat in a modest estate, but it was peaceful. Amaka introduced her to a local NGO that supported teenage girls from poor backgrounds, offering counseling and skills training. At first, Juliet was resistant. "What do I even have to offer them?" she asked. Amaka smiled. "Your story, your pain, your mistakes." Juliet took her time. She started attending the weekly sessions quietly, sitting at the back. She listened to young girls talk about bullying, shame, rejection, and the fear of not being good enough. Slowly, something awakened inside her: empathy. One day, the NGO coordinator asked her to speak. Nervously, Juliet stood before the girls. Her voice shook, but she told her story: everything. The lies, the pride, the slap, the downfall. She cried openly, and so did the girls. For the first time, her pain had purpose. It wasn't just for her anymore. It was for healing others. That moment marked the beginning of her transformation from the influencer to something deeper, a woman of impact. Word began to spread about her new life. People were curious. Was it all a PR stunt? Was she broke or truly changed? But Juliet didn't care anymore. For the first time, she wasn't living to prove a point. She was simply living as herself. She enrolled in a mentorship program and started creating free content about embracing identity, healing from shame, and finding worth outside of money. The same voice that once mocked others was now lifting them. Juliet wasn't looking for fame anymore, just peace. And ironically, it was in the simplest life she had once mocked that she found her richest joy. The same girl who once judged a maid was now sweeping her own path, not in shame, but in strength. And though she had lost everything, she was finally beginning to discover something priceless: her soul. Juliet stood before the rusty iron gate of her childhood home in Ajagunal, clutching a small nylon bag that carried all she had left. It had been over 6 years since she last stepped foot in that compound, and everything around her looked smaller than she remembered. The unpainted walls, the familiar smell of kerosene and rain-soaked sand, the echoes of children playing with old tires in the distance. Her heart pounded. This was the place she had run from, erased from her story, and insulted whenever it was mentioned. Yet here she was, returning not as a queen, but as a prodigal daughter. With trembling hands, she knocked. The door opened, And her mother stood there, older, thinner, but her eyes still held that same fire of resilience. "Juliet," the woman gasped. Juliet couldn't speak. Tears poured from her eyes as she dropped the bag and knelt, crying into her mother's wrapper. Her mother said nothing. She simply bent down and held her daughter, rubbing her back like she did when she was a little girl, crying after getting bullied for wearing torn sandals to school. The house hadn't changed. The cracked ceiling still leaked when it rained. The fan still buzzed like a faulty motor. But to Juliet, it felt like a palace. That night, she sat on the mat with her mother, eating plain Gary and groundnut, listening to the sound of crickets outside. "I've missed this," she whispered, dipping her hand into the bowl. Her mother smiled faintly. "This is home, Juliet. No matter how far you go, this place will always be your beginning. You can't cut it off." Juliet nodded, the words cutting deep. "I was ashamed," she confessed. "Ashamed of you, of this house, of myself." Her mother's eyes welled up, but she remained calm. "You weren't ashamed. You were lost. But sometimes, getting lost is how we find our way back." Juliet leaned into her mother's shoulder and sighed deeply. For the first time in years, she felt a genuine sense of safety, not from money, but from presence. That night, she slept without makeup, without a phone by her side, and without the crushing weight of expectation. She slept like a child again, free, unburdened, and whole. In the following days, Juliet reconnected with neighbors who still remembered her as the talkative little girl with big dreams. Some welcomed her with open arms, others whispered judgments from afar, still stung by her past arrogance. But Juliet no longer walked with pride in her steps. She walked with humility. She visited her former primary school and saw a girl wearing the same torn uniform she once wore. She donated her last savings to fix the classroom roof. "It's not much," she told the head teacher, "but maybe it will keep the rain out." She helped her mother with chores, fetched water from the community tap, and even joined the women to sweep the street during sanitation day. Slowly, the community began to warm up to her again, not because of what she had, but because of how she had changed. The Juliet they once knew had returned, not the influencer, but the girl with a genuine heart. And in that rediscovery, Juliet began to taste something she had long forgotten: peace rooted in authenticity. Each evening, Juliet would sit outside her mother's house, watching the sunset melt into the horizon. With no fans, no Wi-Fi, and no distractions, she found herself reflecting deeply. Her mind played back the journey she had taken, the rise, the lies, the slap, and the devastating fall. She remembered her prideful speeches, her savage comments online, and her obsession with climbing ladders that led nowhere. She finally saw the truth in Amaka's words, that she had used her pain as a weapon instead of healing from it. Her arrogance wasn't power. It was a mask for the little girl inside who never felt good enough. She saw now how her rejection of her past was actually a rejection of herself. Her story could have been a testimony, but she had turned it into a lie, thinking that shame could be erased with filters and fake accents. Juliet sighed deeply and spoke aloud to no one. "God, I don't want that life back. Not if it costs me my soul." She started journaling, not for followers, not for content, but for healing. Each page she filled with painful truths and moments of grace. She wrote about Mama Grace, the woman she had hurt so deeply, and how her eyes had shown no hatred, only sorrow. She imagined how differently things would have turned out if she had just greeted her, treated her with dignity, or even offered to help in the kitchen. One small act of kindness could have changed everything. But now that door was closed. Charles had moved on. She saw a post online that he had traveled abroad, possibly to start afresh too. She didn't message him. She knew he had made his decision. Losing him wasn't the punishment, she wrote in her journal. The real punishment was realizing I never deserved him in the first place. Yet even in her pain, she found a new kind of strength, not the loud, glamorous kind, but the quiet kind that comes from acceptance. Acceptance of who she was, where she came from, and who she now chose to become. One afternoon, as she washed clothes outside, an elderly woman passing by stopped and said, "You look like someone I used to know, that proud girl from Instagram. But you can't be her." Juliet smiled softly. I was her, but I'm someone else now." The woman blinked, then nodded approvingly. "That's good. Pride has no reward but loneliness." That interaction stayed with Juliet. She realized that while she couldn't erase the past, she could build a future that honored it. She decided to use her story as a mirror for others, especially young women like her, who felt pressured to become someone else just to be seen. She reached out to the NGO again and offered to volunteer full-time. Her mother beamed with pride, saying, "This is the Juliet I raised." Juliet chuckled. "Maybe now I'm finally worthy of that name." She still had no money, no fame, and no man, but what she had now couldn't be bought: clarity, conscience, and calm. Juliet sat at the wooden table in her mother's tiny sitting room, a pen in hand and a blank sheet before her. The ceiling fan creaked slowly above her, but her hands trembled more than the blades. After days of reflection, she knew there was one more thing left to do, the hardest thing: apologize. Not just to God, not just to herself, but to the woman whose face she had slapped in arrogance, Mama Grace. She had rehearsed the words 1,000 times in her head, but now that it was time to write, nothing came easily. Finally, she took a deep breath and began. "Dear Mama Grace, I have no excuse for what I did. No justification for the disrespect I showed. I judged you wrongly, I treated you with contempt, and I hurt your son deeply. I write this not because I expect forgiveness, but because it is what's right. I was wrong, deeply wrong, and I'm sorry." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she continued writing, pouring out her shame, her sorrow, and her sincere repentance. She didn't know if Mama Grace would ever read the letter. She didn't even know where to send it. So she gave it to Amaka, who promised to deliver it through a friend connected to the Grace Holdings Foundation. "Even if she never replies," Juliet said, "I just want her to know I'm not the same person anymore." Amaka hugged her. "You're doing the right thing. That's what matters." Juliet sighed. "I wish I could take it all back." Amaka smiled gently. "We can't undo the past, but we can choose what we become because of it." That night, Juliet slept soundly. Something about putting her apology into words, confronting her ugliest truth, had lifted a heavy weight. In the morning, she felt lighter, not because her circumstances had changed, but because her heart had. She no longer needed validation from social media or acceptance from strangers. She just wanted to live honestly, love deeply, and help others avoid the mistakes she made. And that was enough. Days turned into weeks. One day, Juliet was helping young girls at the NGO sort clothes when a black SUV pulled into the compound. Out stepped a tall woman in native attire and dark shades. Juliet froze. It was Mama Grace. The girls whispered excitedly, unaware of the tension. Mama Grace walked directly to Juliet and removed her glasses. Their eyes met. Juliet's knees buckled slightly. "I got your letter," Mama Grace said softly. Juliet nodded, her lips trembling. "I didn't expect you to come." Mama Grace held her hand. "You changed, and that's all I wanted." She smiled. "Let's talk." Juliet led her to a corner under a mango tree, and they sat on a wooden bench. For the first time since that terrible day, Juliet felt like she could breathe again. Not as a redeemed influencer, not as a forgiven sinner, but as a growing woman learning to live with grace. Juliet sat under the mango tree beside Mama Grace, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could barely believe what was happening. The woman she had once humiliated now sat beside her, not with condemnation, but compassion. Mama Grace looked around at the young girls chatting and giggling in the NGO's open yard. "So this is where you've been pouring yourself," she said quietly. Juliet nodded. "It's the only place where I feel like I'm doing something right." Mama Grace smiled, and it wasn't a condescending smile. It was one of understanding, the kind that comes from knowing the weight of transformation. "People think strength is about wealth or being feared," she said. "But it's about owning your past, confronting it, and deciding to do better. That's what you've done, Juliet." Tears filled Juliet's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not dragging me publicly, for even coming here." Mama Grace chuckled. "Dragging you wouldn't have helped you grow. But seeing this," she gestured toward the yard, "this is redemption. This is legacy. The next day, the NGO director formally invited Juliet to speak during their annual outreach event. At first, she was hesitant. She still struggled with shame. Would people listen to someone who once prided herself on shallowness? But Amaka encouraged her. Your voice matters now more than ever, she said. They need to see the fall and the rise. That's what makes it real. Juliet took a deep breath and accepted. When the day came, she stood before over 100 young women from slums across Lagos, some pregnant, some school dropouts, some victims of abuse. She told her story with honesty. How she ran from her roots, built a life on pretense, and lost everything in one slap. But more importantly, she shared how healing began the day she embraced who she truly was. You don't need fake accents, foreign clothes, or rich boyfriends to be worthy, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. You're worthy because you exist, and your story matters, just as it is. After her speech, several girls came to hug her, their faces soaked in tears. One girl said, I was going to bleach my skin next week, but I won't anymore. You made me see I'm beautiful like this. Another whispered, thank you for telling the truth. I thought I had to lie about my background to succeed too. Juliet hugged each of them tightly, overwhelmed. That evening, she sat outside the center alone, staring at the stars. She felt something she hadn't felt in years, genuine fulfillment. Not from applause or likes or camera flashes, but from seeing lives touched by her truth. It was in that quiet moment that Juliet made a vow to herself, to spend the rest of her life using her voice to lift others. Her past had once been her prison, but now it had become her platform, and she would never again be ashamed of where she came from. With her newfound purpose, Juliet embraced a life of service with unwavering dedication. Each morning, she woke up early to sweep the compound of the NGO, help prepare meals, and organize counseling sessions for the girls. No task was beneath her anymore, not after everything she had lost and learned. She began developing workshops focused on self-worth, financial literacy, and the dangers of living for external validation. What shocked many people was how honest she was about her failures. I was addicted to being seen, she would say, even if I had to fake everything to get attention. But it cost me my peace, my relationships, and my dignity. Slowly, her reputation began to change, not from another viral moment, but from consistent impact. Local news stations interviewed her, this time not as a disgraced influencer, but as a voice of transformation. From arrogance to advocacy, one headline read, it made her smile, not from pride, but gratitude. Mama Grace remained in touch, checking in from time to time. She even surprised Juliet by donating sewing machines and computers to the NGO. This is for the girls, she said. Let them learn skills that can never be taken from them. Juliet wept as she watched the girls dance around the new equipment. You're the kind of woman I want to become, she told Mama Grace one day. The older woman touched her shoulder gently. You already are. You just needed to believe it. Despite all the growth, Juliet still battled waves of guilt, especially when she thought of Charles. She often wondered what might have been if she hadn't ruined everything. But instead of chasing him, she chose to become someone worthy, not for him, but for herself. That decision, that quiet refusal to beg for what she hadn't earned, became another step in her redemption. She wasn't looking for shortcuts anymore. She was committed to the long road of healing, one paved with accountability and service. One evening, Juliet and Amaka sat on the roof of the NGO building, watching the sun dip beneath the skyline. Do you miss it? Amaka asked. The glam, the brands, the parties? Juliet smiled thoughtfully. I miss the illusion, but not the emptiness. I thought I had everything, but I was starving inside. Amaka nodded. I'm proud of you. You chose the hard path. Juliet leaned her head on her friend's shoulder. Thank you for not giving up on me. Amaka laughed. Oh, I almost did, but I knew the real Juliet was still in there, under all the lashes and filters. They both laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was full, like a well that had finally found water. That night, Juliet went to bed and wrote in her journal, I am not my past. I am who I choose to become every single day. And today, I chose grace. For the first time, she believed every word. Months passed, and Juliet became a pillar in the community. Parents brought their daughters to her for mentorship. Local schools invited her to speak. And she even began developing a curriculum for schools titled Rooted in Purpose, Knowing Your Worth Beyond Wealth. Her influence was no longer superficial. It was soul deep. Mama Grace continued to support her quietly, and though Juliet never asked for a second chance with Charles, her actions spoke louder than any apology ever could. One day, during a seminar, a woman approached Juliet and whispered, "You've become the talk of town. Even Charles's cousins speak highly of you now." Juliet smiled politely, but her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if he would ever forgive her, but knowing she had changed, really changed, was enough for her to let go of the need for closure. She had made peace with the consequences of her past, and now she was focused on the legacy she was building from it. It wasn't long before Juliet's journey caught the attention of national platforms. She was invited to share her story on a popular television talk show. Sitting under the studio lights, dressed in a simple Ankara gown, she told the country how she lost everything by trying to become someone she wasn't, and how losing it all helped her discover her true self. "I used to think money and fame made you valuable," she said on air. "But your real worth comes from how you treat people, especially those who can do nothing for you." The host applauded her. Viewers called in, some crying, others confessing how her story saved them from going down similar paths. Juliet wasn't just a speaker now. She was a mirror, one that reflected painful truth and offered hope for change. Her story became part of school textbooks, church conferences, and even youth empowerment programs nationwide. Her past was no longer a stain. It was a testimony. Back at the NGO, Juliet continued her work without fanfare. She wasn't chasing headlines anymore. Her fulfillment came from watching a girl who once stuttered now teach others how to make liquid soap, or from a teenage mother reading her first book in English. One day, after dismissing the girls for the evening, Juliet stood at the gate, looking out at the dusty street that had once felt like chains to her. Now it looked like a red carpet, not one leading to fame, but to a future she had built with her bare hands, with every mistake, every tear, and every act of courage. She took a deep breath and whispered to the wind, "Thank you." Not just to God, but to the pain, the fall, and even to Mama Grace. Because without them, she would never have found this Juliet, the one who had finally become proud of where she came from, and even prouder of who she had become. The transformation Juliet had undergone began rippling far beyond her immediate community. Her NGO work, though rooted in one small compound, began attracting attention from corporate bodies, social impact investors, and philanthropic organizations that resonated with her message. What made her story powerful wasn't just the fall, but the honesty with which she narrated it. Companies that had once blacklisted her began to reach out, not with modeling gigs or ambassador roles, but with offers to partner on youth empowerment programs. Juliet declined any brand that promoted vanity or superficial ideals. "If the message isn't about value from within," she told one executive, "then it doesn't align with my new purpose." She wasn't trying to climb ladders anymore. She was building bridges. She helped expand the NGO's reach into nearby slums, set up mobile training workshops, and recruited other reformed influencers and ex-convicts to join in sharing stories of redemption. What had started as a punishment had now become a powerful movement. One particular initiative that caught fire was her Slum to Stage project, a community talent discovery program that provided young people from poor backgrounds a chance to showcase their gifts in arts, technology, and storytelling. She remembered how her own voice had once been silenced by shame and the desire to impress. "We're giving these children something I never had, permission to be seen for who they really are," she explained during a stakeholder briefing. The project exploded in popularity. News crews began covering the events, and sponsors donated equipment and stage platforms. Juliet made it clear that this wasn't charity, it was restitution. "I failed the test life gave me, but I can help others pass theirs," she told a group of teenage girls during a workshop. The girls watched her with awe, not because she was famous, but because she was real. And in a world obsessed with perfection, authenticity had become her greatest influence. Despite her growing recognition, Juliet remained grounded. She continued to sweep the compound each morning and insisted on participating in every hands-on activity. Her team begged her to delegate, but she smiled and said, "If I forget how to serve, I forget why I started." During one training session, a girl named Loveth approached her quietly. "Auntie Juliet," she whispered, "I used to bleach my skin because boys said I was too dark. But now I want to be like you. Natural, strong, and smart." Juliet held the girl's face in her hands and smiled through tears. "Never let the world define your beauty. You're enough, just like this." That moment wasn't captured by cameras, but it was imprinted in the girl's heart forever. That, Juliet realized, was her legacy, not the headlines, but the healed hearts. She had lost everything the world considered important, yet now she possessed something few people ever truly find: impact that outlives applause. Juliet had just finished leading a mentoring session when Amaka burst into her office, eyes wide. "He's here," she whispered. "Who?" Juliet asked, confused. "Charles," Amaka replied. "He just walked into the compound. He's talking to Mama Grace by the gate." Juliet froze, her heart pounding. It had been nearly a year since she last saw him, and though she had long stopped fantasizing about reconciliation, she often wondered what she would say if they ever met again. She quickly looked at herself. No makeup, her gown stained from painting benches earlier in the day, and her braids loosely tied. There was no time to fix anything. Slowly, she walked out toward the gate, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Charles turned, and their eyes met. He hadn't changed much, still composed, still kind-eyed. But this time, she didn't feel inferior or desperate. She felt calm. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he replied, studying her. There was a pause, thick with everything unsaid. Mama Grace watched silently, then smiled and walked away, leaving them alone. Juliet gestured toward the large mango tree. "Want to sit?" Charles nodded. As they sat, a breeze swept through the compound, stirring leaves across the dusty ground. "I saw your TV interview," Charles began, "and I read about the programs. You've done a lot." Juliet looked down, then met his eyes. "It wasn't to impress anyone. It was to find myself. I had to rebuild from ruins." Charles nodded. "I know." Silence returned, but it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. "I'm not here to reopen wounds," he said after a moment. I wanted to see for myself. Mama told me you changed, but I needed to feel it. And I have." Juliet's eyes misted. "I don't expect anything, Charles. I never did. You gave me the wake-up call I needed. And even if you'd never come back, I'd still be doing this work." He smiled gently. "And that's why I came. Because you're not who you were. You're more." They talked for over an hour, reminiscing about their first date, the silly jokes they shared, and even the slap, now a bittersweet reference point. "That slap," Juliet said, half laughing through a tear, "was my breaking point. But it was also the beginning of my healing." Charles nodded. "It broke a wall between who you pretended to be and who you truly are." Before leaving, he looked at her and said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I want to be part of whatever comes next, even if it's just cheering you from afar." Juliet smiled. "That's enough for me." They hugged. It wasn't romantic. It was redemptive. A closing of one chapter and the gentle promise of another. As he walked away, Juliet didn't feel like she was losing something. She felt whole. Because for once, the goodbye wasn't bitter. It was full of grace. The next morning, Juliet stood before a new set of girls gathered in the NGO's courtyard, their eager eyes watching her every move. Many had heard her story by now, how she fell from fame, slapped a powerful woman by mistake, and lost everything. But they didn't look at her with pity. They saw hope, that someone who had made grave mistakes could still rise and lead. Juliet held up a chalkboard with the words, "Your roots don't limit you, they ground you." She smiled. "I once thought my background was something to be ashamed of. I hid it, ran from it, even insulted it. But it was my greatest blessing. Because roots give you something fame never can. depth, and wings without roots just make you fly in circles. The girls clapped. A few nodded, wiping tears. Others raised their hands, asking questions about confidence, forgiveness, and purpose. Juliet answered them all with honesty. She wasn't a preacher or a guru. She was just a woman who had tasted pride, brokenness, and redemption, and survived it all. Her story was now part of school curriculums in Lagos, and invitations poured in from churches, youth programs, and universities. But Juliet never let the platform outgrow her humility. Whenever she stepped on stage, she made sure to mention her mother, Amaka, and Mama Grace. "I stand here because these women didn't give up on me," she'd say. "They saw the seed beneath the thorns." Her mother, who once wept in silence as Juliet mocked their poverty, now held her head high at events, introduced as the mother of a nation builder. Amaka, once dismissed as too local, became Juliet's project manager, overseeing every outreach with excellence and heart. And Mama Grace? She became a quiet mentor, visiting often and reminding Juliet that strength without wisdom was dangerous. "You're soaring now," she told Juliet one evening, "but stay rooted. That's what will keep you from crashing again." That evening, Juliet stood once more at her old childhood compound, now renovated and repainted through donations from the community. A plaque at the entrance read, "Juliet's Place, from ashes to purpose." Children played inside, learning, laughing, healing. Juliet's mother stood beside her, tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd live to see this," she whispered. Juliet smiled. "It was always here, Mama. I just had to find my way back." She walked through the halls and classrooms, her heels clicking softly on the tiled floor, not the sound of arrogance, but purpose. The same feet that once strutted past poor people now moved gently among them. She paused by the door, looked out at the evening sky, and whispered to herself, "This is the life I was meant to live." She didn't need the applause of the world anymore. Her legacy was already growing. In every girl who now believed she was enough, in every young woman who learned that humility and truth were the true definitions of beauty. Juliet had finally grown wings. But they were wings held firmly by roots that would never let her fly away from who she truly was again. The hall was packed to capacity, filled with students, teachers, community leaders, media representatives, and women from all walks of life. Juliet stood backstage, adjusting her head wrap in the mirror, her heart steady. She wasn't nervous, just deeply reflective. It was the annual Women of Impact Conference, and for the first time, Juliet wasn't just a guest, she was the keynote speaker. The theme of the event was beauty from brokenness, finding power in pain, and there was no one more fitting to close the ceremony. She stepped out slowly to a thunderous applause, not because she was famous, but because her story had traveled into hearts across the nation. Juliet raised her hand to calm the crowd and smiled. "I used to think I had to become someone else to be respected. I thought wealth and beauty would give me value. But I was wrong. My real value came the day I lost everything and found myself." She went on to tell the story she had told so many times, how she had grown up in poverty, hated her background, climbed a fake ladder built on pride, and slapped a woman she thought was a maid. The hall went silent as she paused and looked across the room. That woman, Mama Grace, turned out to be my fiancé's mother and the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the country. In one moment of pride, I lost love, dignity, and opportunities. I became a national disgrace. She paused again. But that slap saved my life. Gasps filled the room. Because sometimes pain is the loudest wake-up call. And when you humble yourself and begin to serve with your truth, everything changes. Juliet shared how she had returned home, embraced her roots, found healing, and used her voice to mentor and empower others. She finished with a line that echoed long after the event. "The world may forget the glitter, but it will never forget the grace you leave behind." As she stepped off the stage, the crowd gave her a standing ovation. Journalists scrambled for quotes, but Juliet walked straight to her mother, who sat in the front row with Mama Grace and Amaka beside her. They all embraced, their tears flowing freely. "You did it," Mama Grace whispered. "You turned your fall into a foundation." Later that night, Juliet returned to the NGO center. The compound was quiet, bathed in moonlight. She stood before the tree where she had first written her apology letter and smiled. Life had come full circle. She wasn't just a redeemed woman. She was a vessel for others' transformation. In her final journal entry, she wrote, "I was broken. I was lost. I was proud. But now I'm whole. I'm home. And I'm finally free. Not because the world forgave me, but because I learned to forgive myself." The Juliet who once slapped a stranger in arrogance had now raised hundreds of girls in purpose. And that not fame, not wealth, not applause, was the truest form of success. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.